here, like right before white was here. They had
So welcome. It's a pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Stephanie Kim. Stephanie is the Program Director at the Center for Korean Studies, which is part of the Institute of East Asian Studies here at UC Berkeley. She did her doctorate at UCLA in social science and comparative education. She considers education to be her disciplinary home. Stephanie's research focuses on ways that migration and higher education interact. She's interested in the tensions between privilege and inequality, national identity and mobility for both faculty and students. She's currently working on a book that connects both globalization and individual stories and the role of education in both. I think that we'll find Stephanie to be a great resource in helping us understand how these issues are playing out across large sections of the globe. Today she will talk about Western faculty flight risk at a Korean university and the complexities of internationalization in Asian higher education.
So first, I would like to thank you for coming to this talk, especially on such a beautiful day like today. I know that people would rather be outside, but thank you once again. I especially want to thank Dr. Goldwasser as well as the staff who made this clothing and my parents here possible. I actually do this kind of event coordination, actually with my assistant Yu-jung who's in the audience right now, over at the Center for Korean Studies. So I know how much work goes on behind the scenes in this kind of thing. So with that said, I'd like to, as Dr. Goldwasser has mentioned, I'll just add to a little bit of self-introduction. So my research focuses on the intersection of migration and higher education in Asia, and as well as the Asian diaspora. And specifically, I use a higher education lens to understand the movement of people to, from, and within Asia. And so the talk that I am about to give today is based on my doctoral research that I conducted while I was at UCLA. I've organized this talk into 3 sections. First, I will situate my research against the backdrop of internationalization in Asian higher education. Next, I will introduce my findings at a Korean university. And lastly, I will conclude with a discussion of faculty flight risk and its larger implications. So, the background. I first want to make a note on my terminology. I'm going to throw around these terms quite a bit: globalization, internationalization, and they're very heavily used in many kinds of scholarship, and specifically I'm drawing on higher education scholarship when I'm using these terms. So I'm using globalization to refer to the economic, political, and societal forces pushing 21st century higher education towards greater international involvement. And when I use the term internationalization, I'm referring specifically through the methods through which higher education institutions respond to globalization, and more specifically, I'm using internationalization to signify predominantly a search for student markets domestically and abroad. So the, yes, did you have a?
Yeah, what do you mean by student market? Or maybe?
Oh, I will actually get to that in a bit because it ties in with a few themes that I do want to address. So, but if I haven't answered your question, I will definitely come back to that. So, Asia has taken the Asian higher education sector has taken the internationalization agenda very seriously. This begins with the 1997 Asian financial crisis that initiated a shift in the way higher education institutions conceptualize their function and delivery. For example, following the crisis, international student mobility would often be referred to in terms of quote-unquote surplus or a deficit. While this crisis alone did not necessarily change the landscape, there was certainly an increase in market-oriented rhetoric surrounding the function and delivery of higher education. Furthermore, beginning in the early 2000s, the WTO began to list educational services as a tradable commodity, which reinforced higher education as a tradable good in Asia. exacerbating this trend is the incredibly low birth rate that has led to a shrinking population of domestic students in places like Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, South Korea, as well as a growing number of Asian students studying abroad, primarily in English-speaking countries like the United States for their higher education. These trends, in conjunction with the global competition phenomenon, which I will talk about shortly, have resulted in Asian higher education institutions turning to internationalization strategies as a basic means for institutional survival. So I'm talking about something called the global competition phenomenon in higher education. And I'm not sure how, what the background of this audience is. I know most of you come from the School of Education. There isn't necessarily a higher education program in the school, please correct me if I'm mistaken. So I could talk a little bit more about this. The global competition phenomenon in higher education refers specifically to forces that are pushing higher education institutions all over the world towards a monolithic model of institutional quality. This begins with the emergence of global rankings, such as those published by the Times Higher Education or the Shanghai Jiaotong University, which use research output as a primary measure of institutional quality. Furthermore, because of larger histories of Western economic development and traditions, and the fact that most highly ranked journals, the SCI and SSCI journals included, are primarily in English, this has led to a number of post-colonial critiques that global rankings are dominated by Western measures of institutional quality. At the same time, in the context of a broader neoliberal shift in higher education, students are increasingly seen as customers of knowledge, and faculty are increasingly being treated as providers of knowledge, service providers of knowledge. And this is where we get to the idea of academic capitalism, that knowledge is no longer a public good, but a tradable commodity. Hence the increase of looking at student markets, primarily looking at students as customers who are potentially purchasing their knowledge. Now, the Korean higher education sector is no exception to these trends. As you can see here, the number of outgoing Korean students from South Korea has steadily increased since the early 1990s. This quote-unquote deficit of students in Korean higher education, actually, going back a bit, sorry. You can actually see most Korean students choose to study in the United States. And this graph shows the top 10 sending countries of international students to U.S. higher education. As you can see, South Korea is the third largest sender, outranked only by China and India. It's also important to note that China and India each have a population of over 1 billion, whereas South Korea proportionately has a greater proportion of students who go overseas, even though in absolute numbers it's smaller. So this quote-unquote deficit of student mobility in Korean higher education has led to the government implementing 3 major reforms to address this. First is the Brain Korea 21 or BK21 project, which nurtures a small selection of institutions with increased funding in the hopes that some will become world-class institutions. The second is the Study Korea project, which targets foreign students to come to Korean universities through scholarship and marketing initiatives. And last, and the project I will focus a bit more on, is the World-Class University project. And this project seeks to recruit foreign faculty members to Korean universities through special funding schemes. To provide a bit more detail, the World-Class University project was launched in 2008 over a period of 5 years, and it distributed approximately $730 million of funds to a small selection of Korean universities in the hopes that these universities would, one, create new departments, particularly in what has been deemed as growth-generating fields. This mostly refers to the STEM fields, science, engineering, technology, and also to hire full-time foreign faculty within these new fields, and lastly, to invite foreign faculty as temporary visiting scholars. And as you can see, this has led to an unprecedented growth in foreign faculty members in Korean higher education. Today, there are over 7% of all full-time faculty in Korean higher education are foreign nationals, compared to just over 2% in the year 2000. So these trends in Korea, as well as elsewhere in Asia, have led to a number of scholars launching the critique that there is an inherent Western advantage in the internationalization of Asian higher education. For example, in a 2014 book published by Robert Rhodes, who was one of my former professors at UCLA, he argued that internationalization in Chinese higher education relied on the influence of international standards on scholarship and the hosting of foreign faculty members and students that some Chinese faculty members saw as a form of Western colonialism over academic norms. And many other scholars, some of whom I've cited here, have advanced similar arguments. But looking more specifically within the higher education sector, we can actually see the same critique launched. For example, Shin believes that foreign degree holders possess a considerable advantage within Korean higher education, even if their research output is similar to domestic degree holders. Additionally, Palmer and Cho point out that Korean faculty members often view foreign faculty members as preferred, but nonetheless less qualified. And this critique that somehow that all things Western are inherently advantaged permeates, whether it's in scholarship on Asian higher education or specifically Korean higher education. But I'm actually taking a kind of devil's advocate position here. When one examines the particulars of any one institution's strategies, the supposedly overarching power dynamic becomes more complex and can no longer be explained sufficiently between this dichotomy between hegemonic practices of the West and marginalized counterparts in Asia. Hence, in this talk, I argue that Western faculty members are actually systematically deprived of power when working at a Korean university, and that this brings to light an unexpectedly inverse power dynamic that has larger implications for how we understand the internationalization of Asian higher education. And this brings us to the study that I conducted at an international college in South Korea. So what is an international college in South Korea? Well, it's specifically, different universities have taken this approach in slightly different ways, but the overarching similarity is that within a larger Korean university, these smaller colleges within them have emerged. And these colleges define themselves as international or otherwise non-Korean. And this can take on many different forms. Previously, in the early 2000s, there were divisions of international studies that launched this movement, but it didn't really take shape until the launching of Underwood International College in 2006. We're an entirely separate college that more or less runs like an independent honors college within the larger Korean university merge. Since then, Yuha Women's University launched a similar college, and actually a handful have sprung up since then, not just in Seoul, but in many regional areas as well in South Korea. Specifically with Underwood International College, the first freshman class entered in 2006. It bills itself as an American-style liberal arts college with a curriculum that follows this tradition where for the first 2 years, students take a kind of liberal arts general and curriculum, and the latter 2 years, after declaring a major, are then pushed into specialized classes. The instruction is entirely in English, which is quite remarkable when you think that this space is taking place within a Korean university. All faculty members are foreign nationals. I started here because the requirements have shifted slightly. As of 2014, they have changed it where your nationality may be Korean if and only if all your degrees, your higher education degrees, were obtained outside of South Korea. specifically, Underwood International College, or UIC, builds itself around this concept of inbound globalization. And this is a term frequently used by the former Yonsei University president, but also has been used by the founding UIC dean, as you can see here, Chong Rin-bo. That UIC promotes inbound globalization that aims to globalize the Yonsei campus by attracting foreign students and professors. Specifically, international students and international faculty members must be brought into Yonsei University to create a global campus. And so it really builds itself around bringing in those who are non-Korean nationals as both professors and students. At the time I conducted this research, all the UIC faculty were nationals of the United States, United Kingdom, France, and Denmark. And many of them, while they may have had personal reasons to come to South Korea, for example, a Korean spouse, or perhaps a research focus in Korean studies, the primary reason that the vast majority of them came was because this job was the best, or perhaps the only academic appointment that they could get. So suffice it to say that these faculty were all young. They were actually immediately, or perhaps only a few years outside of their PhD program, and all untenured at the time I conducted this research. So for a faculty body that is young and untenured, there's a really important point to be made, and that because they are untenured, they cannot hold the senior administration posts of their own college, and it is important to point out that all of the deans thus far have come from other academic departments. They've been Korean faculty members from other departments. And this plays out in very important ways. For example, UIC was originally created based in the main campus of Yonsei University in Seoul, but beginning in 2011, the home base was moved to a place called Songdo International Campus. Songdo is a free economic zone. It's about 90 minutes away from the main campus in Seoul. It's perhaps the best way to conceptualize it is if Berkeley did go ahead with this kind of global campus enrichment idea, imagine that, except this is an entirely government-planned and created city that did not have any kind of local community beforehand, and imagine it's about an hour and a half away, and it's not just a couple subway stops away from Richmond. And so for a number of reasons, faculty don't necessarily want to hold their classes there or really have a strong relationship with Songdo. But in 2011, the UIC home base was pretty much just moved there with the consent of the faculty in exchange for concessions that were never delivered. And you can see this quote here from someone who I interviewed. They promised a certain number of faculty hires. They promised us more space on the main campus. Along those lines, more housing. Most saliently, what upsets us the most is that they were signed contracts. We fulfilled our end of the bargain, and they did not. In addition to the moving of the home base, there were several other large structural changes that were put onto the college. For example, 2 new academic wings were placed without the consent of the UIC faculty, and you can hear one faculty commenting on this. A lot of these things seem to have been done with very little forethought or planning, especially the Asian Studies program. It was basically just an idea of the former president. We were told that we would have to accept it. The techno arts was another brainchild of the previous administration, and they had no institutional fund. It was only 2 or 3 weeks ago that we were told it was now part of UIC. At times, it seems there is an utter lack of transparency, while it certainly decreases job satisfaction for faculty members. Now, this, it's arguable to say whether this is specifically a case of this international college or perhaps more resonant within a Korean university in general. But the point is that because UIC deans have never come from the existing faculty body and have always come from another department from outside, there exists a serious conflict of interest because those deans obviously may put the interests of their home department before that of the college over which they preside. Furthermore, it's important to note that in South Korea, Korean faculty members are likely to have stronger ties to their home department in a way that supersedes their dedication to UIC. This is primarily because while Korean faculty members may oftentimes hold a PhD from a U.S. university or otherwise from outside Korea, they oftentimes hold undergraduate degrees from the same Korean university in which they are hired. This speaks to a larger sort of and very strong alumni network of seniors and juniors, in which there are very clear hiring advantages, especially for Korean faculty members, after getting their PhD degrees in the United States, that they often return to the same Korean university in which they got their undergraduate degree from. But specifically, this kind of hiring advantage is not the case for the foreign faculty members who work at UIC. And because the college will explicitly not hire those faculty members with those alumni connections. And so, ironically, the fact that they were not educated in South Korea as a foreign faculty member actually works to their disadvantage on an institutional level, even though it is what is often cited as being an advantage in South Korea more broadly. And so a senior, in fact, this is not just a byproduct of hiring non-Korean faculty, but a senior administrator actually told me that this is a conscious decision on part of UIC, because the senior administrator felt that oftentimes Korean faculty members would get involved in politicking within their departments that they did not want the UIC faculty members to be involved with. And so by its very design, this college cuts off its faculty members from the networking advantages that most Korean faculty members are well plugged into. And you can actually see this resonate in a number of comments that have been told to me. For example, one USC faculty member told me, "It's very difficult to integrate or to make connections or collaborations with Korean faculty members. I imagine some of it's insecurity, or that our experience of coming here was much, much different from what they went through to get the job." Another person told me, "We're the group that has the most vested interest in UIC, but a lot of people who don't attend the meetings also have a lot of sway. The chairs of majors, for instance, have a lot of power, but we very rarely see them at UIC events." And another comment, "I feel like there are many positions that would not be open to me, and personally, I don't really care about them as much. But if my dream was becoming dean, it would probably bother me, because I think there are relatively few deanships in Yonsei that would be open to a foreign professor." In conjunction with their sense of isolation and hopelessness, the faculty members also felt a growing tension due to the misalignment between the professional work requirements made by their institution of employment versus their outside scholarly community. Because UIC is a liberal arts college, the faculty all specialize in humanities or social sciences, and all had indicated that their scholarly reputation depends on the publication of books and monographs. However, in order to maintain the requirements for tenure, they also must maintain a very strict publishing agenda that preferences journal articles over books. And this follows in tow with the global rankings that determine research output primarily by the number of highly ranked journal articles. And faculty members are then rewarded for the number of journal articles that they produce. So what this happens is that the faculty members thus create dual professional identities, one to meet the demands of their institution, and the other to maintain their reputation outside of that. And you can see here, one person told me, in the humanities, it's very important to publish books rather than journal articles. I mean, journal articles are okay, but they don't really generate much reputation for the author. But the Yonsei system places very little emphasis on books, or rather, given the comparative amount of effort that a book takes, as opposed to a journal article, books are rewarded with very few points. A book here is basically valued as 1.5 articles. obviously a book is 10 times as much work, so there's not very much encouragement to produce a book as there is in an American context. But for us to remain relevant in an international context, we have to keep up with American standards. And lastly, someone told me, if I had ignored the North American system, then yeah, you could wind up here without a book and have tenure, which might hurt you trying to go back to North America. But I was conscious of mobility, and so I did produce. I turned my dissertation into a book, and I'm doing the Korean system, which is journal articles. So I want to go into this idea of flight risk. The fact that UIC faculty members have created dual professional identities in order to maintain mobility speaks to how they do not discount the possibility of leaving Yonsei University at a later time in their careers. In fact, nearly all of the UIC faculty members with whom I spoke, even those who have personal reasons to be in South Korea, made it a point to say that they are keeping an eye out for employment opportunities outside of South Korea. And in fact, faculty retention is a huge issue for this college. Many UIC faculty members arrive only to leave within several years. While the university recognizes this problem, the university is more focused on a numbers game, whereby new faculty members are hired to replace ones that leave, resulting in a constantly rotating cycle of newly hired faculty members that offers little sense of stability for the faculty body as a whole. Indeed, the fact that most faculty members chose to work at this college for lack of better employment opportunities, coupled with a recurring feeling of isolation and helplessness upon arrival, creates a faculty body that is a flight risk to the university. The growing disconnect between the needs and ambitions of UIC faculty members with the expectations of them at Yonsei University further exacerbates the flight risk of these well-credentialed, talented, and mobile faculty members who certainly possess the confidence to further develop their careers at universities throughout the world. And so the problem for the Yonsei University is that by fostering a Western faculty body not well integrated within its ranks, the university has also created a faculty body that is ephemeral and transitional. And this leads to a number of interesting points that I believe can be made. So I want to talk about some of these implications. In this talk and in this research, I am arguing that Western faculty members, despite much of contradictory literature, are not necessarily advantaged in the internationalization of Asian higher education. Rather, they have become yet another commodity in the internationalization process. And the constantly rotating cycle of Western faculty members is made possible and sustained on such a large scale because of a poor academic market in the West, which allows a Korean university to perpetually replace those who leave with Korean recruits. This allows the university to also keep up a facade of internationalization that demands the recruitment of Western faculty members without actually changing anything meaningful about the institutional status quo. So given that I am taking a kind of contradictory stance, of course I'm looking to see, is this just an isolated case? Is this also being replicated at other Korean universities or elsewhere in Asia? And this is actually, because recruiting Western faculty members on such a large scale in Asia is actually a relatively new phenomenon. There are not a whole lot of studies that have looked at this, but of the ones that I was able to find, there was a study conducted in Japan, published in 2011, that found that adjunct English instructors at Japanese universities led to an increase of metaphors in the Japanese language that stressed otherness and difference. And so it perpetuated the otherness and sort of lack of ever being fully integrated by this Western faculty body of the Japanese members. I also found another study conducted at a university in the United Arab Emirates, published in 2014, that found that the Western faculty members there had very ambiguous commitments to pursuing a long-term career there, primarily because they felt that the risks that they would take in their teaching and research would not necessarily be supported by their institution of employment. And I do have a few colleagues who are conducting studies now in Taiwan and in Kazakhstan, and I'd be very curious to see what they publish eventually. They've yet to publish their findings, so I'm very curious. And so I'm actually arguing that internationalization is a strategically appropriated facade that an institution can take while still maintaining its institutional status quo. I am arguing that internationalization is not, as many scholars argue, a process of hybridization or so-called westernization. And I'll talk a little bit about this. The strongest proponent of this concept of hybridization is actually Simon Marginson. He gave a talk here at UC Berkeley about, actually exactly a year ago, now that I think about it. It was sponsored through the Center for Studies in Higher Education. And so he's the strongest proponent of hybridization, and he argues that he calls it the Confucian model that is emerging in Asian higher education, whereby Asian institutions are becoming more like Western institutions, thereby becoming more competitive in the global competition phenomenon. And it's not just Marginson who argues this, but perhaps he may have been one of the earliest proponent of this concept of hybridization. But there's a group that I work with, it's called the Asia Pacific Higher Education Research Partnership. They're based at the East-West Center in Hawaii. And they have actually they've created a whole new research cluster and a series of workshops around this idea of hybridization to much to my chagrin, but that's a whole other point. But suffice it to say that this idea of hybridization in Asian higher education has really taken a hold in the scholarship. However, I am arguing that Asian higher education institutions oftentimes have no intention of changing their fundamental institutional identity, and that internationalization is primarily a way to meet the market demands of institutional survival. Hence, we can also conceptualize internationalization as maintaining the institutional status quo, while still reaching markers that indicate that an institution is quote-unquote international or world-class. Furthermore, the commodification of Western pedagogical ideas, practices, and standards via the agents who deliver them, i.e. the faculty members, implies that the liberal arts is also another service that can be commoditized. And this is actually perhaps where I would love to develop this idea further and explore it, see if there are other studies perhaps engaging with this, is that any discourse that pits the liberal arts as the antidote to the commodification of higher education is merely a popular reference point, that liberal arts education can just as easily be commoditized as anything else. And specifically, it's just used as the fact that it's used as a popular reference point as the antidote to commodification is merely just, it's simply just a popular reference point that ignores the complex power dynamics in Asia. So for a further discussion of these, I encourage you to look up an article. It was accepted and it will be forthcoming later this year in Comparative Education in a special issue of Asian Higher Education. So thank you.
Questions?
Yeah, there are a couple quotes from students that I did not include in this talk for purposes of time, but the students, there's generally a sense of low morale amongst the students in that they can sense the extreme power discrepancy amongst their own faculty within this international college. For example, one student whom I interviewed, she commented how she could sense how faculty were very disturbed by the way they were made to change offices very abruptly. They were made to do this or that without any kind of negotiation. Amongst the students, they can actually sense this too, and it's actually created a very low sense of morale. But that's not to say that, you know, for the students, I think there's a very very special dynamic happening as well in that it's actually a different portion of the study. But the students, ironically, though this international college is designed to attract foreign students, it actually has a very hard time doing so. And so the only foreign students that it is able to attract is through specifically scholarships, and most come through from other parts of Asia, mostly Southeast Asia and China. And that so the majority of the student body is actually composed of those who are Korean citizens with advanced English capability, Korean students who would otherwise study abroad. This gives them a domestic alternative. But that's actually a whole separate issue.
So the work you cited and kind of your research focused on Asia, and I was just wondering whether similar analysis is happening about institutions in other parts of the world. Because I believe a similar process is happening in other places.
I mean, obviously I specialize in Asian higher education, but perhaps if you could familiarize me with you, I mean, I can't say I can speak with any authority on, for example, Latin America or something like that. But you mentioned that there's a similar dynamic.
Well, I just know of one specific in Slovakia, and this is happening not only with higher education but also with high schools. That they're trying to open high schools that are just English speaking and recruit foreign faculty, well, teachers.
Right. I mean, I imagine that there's, of course I could be wrong, but I imagine that there may be a similar dynamic played out in the so-called non-Western world, and it's not necessarily just exclusive to Asia, specifically because this phenomenon is happening in competing to be highly ranked class.
I was wondering if you had a theory as to why you see a greater amount of students who are from Asian countries who are going to the West for their education. Like you mentioned, there was from 2000 or something to 2016, there was like a 5% increase in people who were going abroad for their education. So I was wondering if you can speak to possible reasons why you're seeing that.
Yeah, I mean, there's tons of literature on this. The primary reason in the Korean case, and actually in many Asian cases, is that there is an increasing demand for English language speakers in the job market, wherever home is, for example, in South Korea. And in South Korea, there's also a kind of prestige associated with a U.S. higher education degree, and so, which can partially explain why many Korean students choose to study in the United States for the university, as opposed to going abroad elsewhere.
Would that also further an incentive for these universities that you talked about in your case studies to strive for that world-class acclaim, that international acclaim? Is that kind of an attempt to keep domestic students coming to their universities too, or is that mainly to attract foreign students?
That's actually that's a really interesting question in the U.S. It's kind of a push-pull factor. So you have a shrinking pool of domestic students, one because of the low birth rate, but two also because so many students are leaving. And these universities are actually losing out on a lot of tuition revenue because of that. And so to counteract that, initially these government-initiated programs were designed to attract foreign students to Korean universities, but because they can only do that through the incentive of scholarships, the international colleges have emerged, which actually re-attract the Korean students who may have otherwise gone to the United States because they can get the same kind of American style of education at home. I actually, there's also scholarship being done on the California model, and as we're all here, we can see certainly an influx of international students here in the California public higher education system, primarily due to budget cuts and a need for increased tuition revenue. And I would love to somehow connect what is happening in Asia to these budget cuts happening in California, because I think they're highly related, especially when we look at student mobility trends.
Sort of a related question is, I'm wondering how many faculty are recruited to Asian universities that are senior, or the vast majority, or there's so many junior that those are just a drop in the bucket. I just think of two of our psychology colleagues that went later in their careers, and they may care less about advancement or just a nice place to retire, and they'll get a pension from here and money there. Is really mostly just a junior phenomenon, or are there also senior colleagues?
I think it's, obviously different institutions take on different strategies. Specifically with this college, they've targeted young, untenured, not yet at the tenure level. Yeah, I mean, certainly very senior faculty can be invited, whether that's for permanent positions or visiting rotating positions. I mean, a lot of this push in the World Class University Project was to invite a range of scholars with so-called expert knowledge in a certain particular area, and especially in the STEM fields, this is happening a bit more.
Any questions? Okay, well, thank you very much.